Hey, my name is Aruna Matcha and you are watching Non-Feminist Gal. Many who criticize contemporary feminism cite the suffragettes as the original first true feminists. On a History of Feminism Wikipedia entry, it says, most Western feminist historians assert that all women's movements should be classed as feminist movements, even if the women practicing those movements did not call themselves feminists or align themselves with feminism in any way. Now that's proof of how powerful feminist lobbying is. Feminist scholars call this proto-feminism, which is a way for modern feminist thinkers to ascribe women's movements in history under the umbrella of feminism, despite these movements having little to nothing in common with the contemporary feminist movement. It's like comparing the anti-apartheid movement with the Black Panthers. Both were about liberating Black people, but that's really all they had in common. Even the nationalities of Black people they were fighting for were different. What is known as second wave feminism, or what I call post-60s Anglophonic feminism, had little in common with the women's movements of the 19th and 20th centuries. In this short book of suffragette manifestos, I only came across the word feminist once, used in passing by Emily Davison. The vast majority of suffragettes and early women's thinkers would not have called themselves feminists, or if they did, it would have meant very different things to what the post-60s feminists believe. This is why many who have researched feminism, like myself, assert that the suffragettes were not the same as feminists. They were a group of women campaigning for the right to vote on the grounds of liberty and equality of opportunity, not for special privileges on the grounds of patriarchal oppression and equality of outcome. Calling the suffragettes feminists is like calling Bernie Sanders a socialist. Mary Wollstonecraft, Emmeline Pankhurst, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are some early Anglophonic women's pioneers. Mary Wollstonecraft believed that both men and women should practice virtue and chastity until marriage. She believed men and women are different, but we should be held to the same moral standards, and that education was a way for women to become better citizens and enjoy the same rights as men. Wollstonecraft published A Vindication on the Rights of Women in 1792, and the word feminisme was not coined until the 1800s, so she never actually called herself a feminist. Moreover, she said nothing about wanting to overthrow the patriarchy. This is a Marxist revolutionary idea, and it's in stark contrast to the ideas of liberalism. Women like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott all belong to the Quaker Church. Quakerism is a denomination of Christianity that is considered progressive compared to some other Christian denominations. They believe that men and women are equal under the eyes of God, whereas some Christian denominations view women as inferior to men. Jesus Christ even preached that women should be treated as equals to men. I'm not denying some of the blatant misogyny within Christianity, particularly in the Old Testament, but it is fair to say that the faction of Christianity that these women belonged to was already pro-gender equality. These women based their ideas of gender equality on the Quaker faith. It had nothing to do with feminism. Moreover, these early women's movements were far from perfect. Many of the suffragettes were not allies to those suffering from racial discrimination during the time. Despite Quakers like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton being part of the movement to abolish slavery, they later lobbied for the voting rights of women at the expense of African Americans, with Anthony famously asserting that she would cut off her own arm before demanding the ballot for the Negro and not the woman. Furthermore, while it's great that the suffragettes fought for the women's right to vote, history ignores the fact that men were not allowed to vote unless they were conscripted for war. In other words, men had to consent to possible death in order to vote, while women got the vote without being forced to potentially die at war. The White Feather Campaign was a campaign which pushed for women to pin white feathers to the jackets of men and boys who opted out of war in order to shame them and mock them as cowardly. These men were being expected to go out and die for the protection of their countries in ways which women were never forced to. But you will seldom hear mainstream feminism discuss this because of the lack of empathy towards men. Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem are the ones who pioneered the contemporary feminist movement. They had no affiliation with the early women's movements, despite somehow calling themselves second-wave feminism. They were not second wave, they were the first wave of contemporary feminism. Steinem asserted that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, and that a husband or lover is the most dangerous threat to a woman. Contemporary feminism took much of its ideas from the Frankfurt School and critical theory, which seeks to reconstruct academia by pushing a cultural Marxist narrative of history that claims that all white men are collectively to blame for the evils of patriarchy. This is not what the suffragettes wanted. All they wanted was the right to vote. They wanted to work with men, not against them. They wanted respect and equality, not Marxist female supremacy. Pioneers of the post-60s Anglophonic feminist movement include Friedan and Steinem, and women like Kate Millett, who declared Freud sexist and authored Sexual Politics, which claimed that men use sex as a way to degrade women. Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon were two radical feminists who were anti-pornography and anti-heterosexual sex. Naomi Wolf, author of The Beauty Myth, asserted that beauty was a patriarchal construct, and other women like Rita Mae Brown, Valerie Solanas, Germaine Greer, Julie Bindel, Robin Morgan, and Vivian Gornick were also part of the early feminist movement. I'm not saying that there weren't and aren't other non-radical, non-man-hating feminists, but these are the women who pioneered the contemporary post-60s feminist movement. Their legacy is continued in the 21st century with women like Laura Bates, Jessica Valenti, and Anita Sarkeesian. Websites like Everyday Feminism, Everyday Sexism, and Feminist Frequency are all rife with militant anti-male bias that doesn't resonate with most women, because most women have never been able to relate to the militant ideas espoused by feminism. Comparing the suffragettes with today's feminists is like comparing those who fought for gay rights with contemporary woke LGBT activists who, instead of wanting homosexual men and women to be treated as equals as they deserve to be, are now lobbying for the erasure of biology from sex and gender. So why have modern feminist historians appropriated these women's movements under the blanket of feminism? The answer is that many of the feminist activists of the 60s moved into academia during the 70s and 80s and started women's studies courses which pushed a feminist agenda. This has led to millions of women believing that we live in a patriarchy that has been designed to oppress women and elevate men, and that women must work to collectively overthrow the patriarchy, just as Marxism pushes for the proletariat to overthrow the bourgeoisie. Most women's rights activists campaigned for the rights of women, but not at the expense of men and families. The 60s and 70s feminist movements were very anti-motherhood and very anti-marriage, and in some cases even anti-heterosexual sex. While feminism came to support the sexual revolution, which I personally agree with, it didn't rally for prostitution to be legalized and claimed that strip clubs, porn, and beauty pageants were objectifying women. It's almost as if feminism doesn't care about women's agency if it doesn't align with feminism. The modern-day feminist movement is mostly comprised of women who rally and lobby for female supremacy and matriarchy. We see this in slogans like "The future is female," which was actually adopted as a feminist slogan in the 1970s. That doesn't sound like equality to me. We need to realize that feminism and women's suffrage are two very different things. You can be for gender equality and for women's rights without being a feminist. But what do you think? Were the suffragettes actually feminists? Is there something about them which I missed to mention in this video? Am I fair in my assertions? Let me know below. For further discussion, feel free to join my Facebook group Liberals Against Feminism for those who have socially liberal views but are not feminists. And when I say liberal, I don't mean leftist. Outside of America, the two are not the same thing.